I hope you enjoy my stories. Instead of just clicking thumbs down, please comment and share how we can do better. If you do like our video, then please like and subscribe.
I live next door to Karen, the lady who seems to find something to complain about every day.
It's like she has a radar for minor inconveniences, turning them into major dramas.
From the noise of the garbage truck in the morning to the way the wind blows leaves onto her lawn, there's always something bothering her. But this time, I thought she had gone completely off the rails. When I first heard about her protest against the moon, I couldn't believe it. I mean, who in their right mind protests against the moon? But then again, this was Karen we were talking about, and nothing seemed too absurd for her to take on. It all began with hushed murmurs echoing through the neighborhood, a quiet ripple that soon erupted into a social media frenzy.
Karen, of all people, had initiated a protest against none other than the moon itself.
Yes, you heard correctly, the moon.
Her reasoning? She adamantly declared that its luminous glow was far too intense, disrupting her precious sleep and throwing her carefully curated nighttime routine into disarray. As incredulous as it sounded, her protest gained momentum, spreading like wildfire across online platforms and sparking debates about lunar rights and the limits of human entitlement.
In all my years, I've heard some truly bizarre tales, but this one surely takes the cake. I mean, who in their right mind protests against the moon?
Well, apparently Karen does.
So, one evening curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to see what all the fuss was about. I cautiously peeked out of my window, and there she was, Karen, standing defiantly in her front yard, with a homemade sign that boldly declared, "Dim the moon." She was passionately shouting about light pollution and how its unrelenting glow was wreaking havoc on her life, disrupting her sleep, and throwing her daily rhythms into disarray. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. I mean, seriously, Karen had really gone off the deep end this time. But as I watched her neighbors gathering around her, some nodding in agreement, while others wore expressions of disbelief, I realized that perhaps the world had taken a turn for the utterly surreal. Here was a group of people earnestly discussing the merits of dimming the moon.
It was like something out of a science fiction novel. In that moment, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the entire world had lost its collective mind.
I shook my head in disbelief, but curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to go over, just to see if this was for real.
As I approached, Karen spotted me and her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Join the fight against the moon," she called out, thrusting a pamphlet into my hand.
I glanced at it, trying to keep a straight face. "Karen, come on."
"The moon? Really?" Karen's expression turned serious, her eyes filled with conviction.
"Yes, really.
It's not just about me, it's about the entire neighborhood. We deserve our beauty sleep without the moon shining through our windows all night long."
I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined.
Karen was on a crusade against the moon, and she seemed determined to recruit anyone who would listen. But she was undeterred. She launched into a passionate monologue about how the moon's brightness was wreaking havoc on her sleep patterns, leaving her unable to function during the day due to constant fatigue. She even had a petition for people to sign, demanding that the moon be dimmed or removed entirely. I didn't know whether to laugh or be genuinely concerned for her sanity.
But as I looked around at the growing crowd of supporters nodding in agreement, I realized that this was more serious to Karen than I had initially thought. Politely declining to sign the petition, I made some excuse about needing to get back home. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of bewilderment.
What had gotten into her? Couldn't she just invest in some heavy curtains?
I made a mental note to suggest that to her next time. The next day, the local news picked up the story, dubbing it Karen's Moonlight Manifesto.
Suddenly, our little neighborhood protest was making headlines around the country, with reporters and curious onlookers flocking to our streets to catch a glimpse of the woman who dared to take on the moon. But as the days passed, the initial fervor died down, and Karen's protest against the moon faded into obscurity.
Eventually, she moved on to some other cause, leaving us all scratching our heads and wondering what had possessed her to embark on such a peculiar crusade.
Yet, every time I look up at the night sky and see the bright, beautiful moon, I can't help but think of Karen and her brief but memorable campaign against the heavens.
And I can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. For those of you who find this hard to believe, well, it's just a minor story compared to some of the other antics she's been involved in.
Like the time she spent 6 months in jail for slapping a cop because she didn't believe he was one, even though he pulled her over in a police car.
But that's a story for another day. Karen sure knows how to keep life interesting. As I strolled down the sunlit street on that warm afternoon, immersed in my own thoughts, I suddenly caught sight of Karen, the quintessential neighborhood eccentric, embarking on what appeared to be a peculiar mission. There she was striding purposefully along the sidewalk, her usually disheveled appearance now accentuated by the intensity in her eyes.
In her hands, she wielded a water-testing kit like a seasoned warrior, brandishing a weapon, her every movement exuding an air of absolute determination. Her wild gaze scanned the surroundings, as if on the lookout for some unseen adversary lurking within the pristine suburban landscape. It was a sight both fascinating and slightly unnerving, as Karen's eccentricity often led to unexpected and sometimes bizarre endeavors. Curiosity piqued. I couldn't help but wonder what prompted her latest escapade, and what mystery sought to unravel with her makeshift arsenal. Karen was convinced that all store-bought water in bottles was a form of mind control serum, secretly distributed by the government, a belief that sounded like something straight out of a conspiracy theory.
However, for Karen, this was no laughing matter. She was dead serious about it.
Her conviction ran deep, fueled by her unwavering belief that she alone could see the truth amidst the fog of deception. To her, every sip of commercially packaged water was a step deeper into a state of manipulated consciousness. She saw herself as a lone crusader against the mass indoctrination, determined to awaken everyone else from their unwitting compliance.
Armed with her water testing kit and fueled by her unwavering determination, Karen embarked on her mission, determined to expose what she saw as a grand scheme to control minds through something as seemingly innocuous as a bottle of water.
As I observed from across the street, Karen's keen eyes locked onto a woman, casually carrying a plastic bottle of water. Without hesitation, Karen let out a piercing shriek, her determination propelling her forward as she lunged toward the unsuspecting passerby.
With a swift motion, she slapped the bottle out of the woman's hand, sending it tumbling to the pavement below.
The clear liquid inside splashed out in all directions, creating a small puddle on the sidewalk as the woman stood frozen, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. "Are you out of your mind?" the woman exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief as she stared incredulously at Karen.
The abruptness of the encounter left her momentarily speechless, her mind struggling to process the bizarre turn of events.
She couldn't fathom why this stranger had reacted so aggressively to her harmless bottle of water, and the sight of it now scattered on the ground only added to her bewilderment.
But Karen wasn't deterred. She pointed to her testing kit, shouting about how she was protecting people from the evil plot to control their minds. A small crowd began to gather, some curious, others concerned. I felt a mix of embarrassment and pity as I watched Karen continue her crusade.
She seemed so convinced of her mission, so passionate about exposing the supposed truth. But her methods were extreme, and it was clear she was causing a scene.
Before long, someone called the police.
2 officers arrived, looking puzzled as they approached Karen, who was now in the midst of a heated argument with a group of onlookers.
"Ma'am, what seems to be the problem here?" one of the officers asked, trying to maintain a calm demeanor.
Karen turned sharply to face them, her eyes ablaze with fervor. "The problem is that they're all under the government's control," she shouted, her voice carrying across the street, her arms gesturing wildly at the crowd gathered around her. Her words rang out with a mix of urgency and frustration, each syllable punctuated by her unwavering conviction. "They're drinking that poison and they don't even know it," she continued, her tone laced with a sense of desperation as she implored those around her to see the truth she believed so fervently. The bystanders exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond to Karen's impassioned outburst. Some shifted uncomfortably on their feet, while others simply watched, their curiosity piqued by the intensity of her conviction.
Yet amidst the murmurs of skepticism and disbelief, Karen remained undeterred, her mission to awaken others from what she perceived as a mass delusion unyielding.
The officers exchanged a look, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. They tried to reason with Karen, but she wasn't interested in listening. She continued to rant and rave, her voice growing hoarse with fervor.
Finally, the officers decided they had no choice but to escort Karen away.
She went with them willingly, still protesting loudly as they led her towards their patrol car.
As they drove off, leaving behind a bewildered crowd, I couldn't help but shake my head.
Karen's beliefs may have been outlandish, but she was convinced she was doing the right thing. It was a strange and chaotic scene, but in a way, it was also a reminder of how easily fear and paranoia can take hold of someone's mind. But then again, I think she was just batshit crazy. My typical tranquility at the farmer's market was shattered on that sunny Saturday morning by Karen's dramatic entrance. With her lawsuit papers clenched in hand, she barged in like a storm, her anger palpable as she made a beeline for the market manager.
From behind my stall, I stood frozen, my disbelief mirrored by others nearby. Karen's eyes blazed with fury, her every step punctuating the tension that filled the air. "I demand justice."
Karen's voice reverberated across the stalls, drawing the attention of vendors and customers alike. "These unregulated vegetables are causing me untold suffering." I couldn't help but exchange bewildered glances with the other vendors, all of us wondering what on earth Karen was going on about this time. Her outbursts were becoming somewhat of a regular occurrence, but this seemed particularly absurd. The market manager, a patient man named Steve, stepped forward, trying to calm her down.
"Karen, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his tone a mix of concern and exasperation. "The problem?" she screeched, her voice cutting through the market noise. "The problem is your reckless disregard for public health."
"I've been suffering from allergies ever since I started buying produce here."
"It's your responsibility to ensure the safety of your customers." Her accusation hung heavy in the air, drawing murmurs from the onlookers. I exchanged worried glances with my fellow vendors, unsure how to react to Karen's escalating tirade. It seemed she was blaming the entire market for her health issues.
Market manager Steve, his patience wearing thin, raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Karen, we take food safety very seriously here. Can you tell me specifically what you believe is causing your allergies?"
Karen just stared at him and stamped her feet with her hand, clutching some papers.
Steve glanced at me and I shrugged, just as clueless as he was.
The morning sunlight cast dappled shadows across the market, highlighting the tension that hung in the air. "Karen, we source our produce from local farmers who follow all the necessary regulations," Steve explained patiently, his voice a calming contrast to Karen's escalating agitation. "We have never had any complaints before." I nodded in agreement with Steve's statement.
Our vendors were proud of the quality and safety of their products. Many of them had been selling at this market for years without any issues. Karen's eyes narrowed as she folded her arms, unconvinced by Steve's reassurances.
"Well, something must have changed."
"I demand to see your records."
"I'll prove that this market is a danger to public health."
Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Karen, I understand your concern, but we take every precaution to ensure the safety of our customers."
"If there's an issue, we'll address it, but I need more than just accusations."
Karen's eyes narrowed even further, and she thrust the lawsuit papers toward him. "Then explain this," she demanded, her voice rising in intensity. The papers rustled with her agitation, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers, who now paused to observe the unfolding drama. Steve took the papers and scanned them quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line he read.
"Karen, this is ridiculous. You're suing us for selling vegetables?"
His disbelief was evident in his voice as he looked up from the papers to meet Karen's intense gaze. The crowd around us murmured in confusion, trying to catch snippets of the conversation.
Some shoppers paused in their browsing, curious about the unfolding drama.
Karen didn't back down, her expression fierce. "Yes, I am," she retorted, her voice dripping with defiance.
These vegetables have caused me so much suffering, and someone needs to be held accountable.
Steve sighed, trying to maintain his composure. Karen, we need to talk about this calmly. Let's step aside and discuss it away from the crowd, he suggested, motioning toward a quieter corner of the market. They're not just any vegetables. Karen insisted, her voice rising with frustration. They're unregulated toxic vegetables that are causing me pain and suffering. I demand compensation.
I couldn't help but let out a snort of disbelief, earning a glare from Karen. She turned back to Steve, her face flushed with indignation, her eyes blazing with intensity. Look, Steve said, trying to reason with her. If you're having allergies, it might not necessarily be because of the vegetables.
Have you tried seeing a doctor?
Allergies can be caused by a variety of factors, and it's important to pinpoint the exact cause.
Karen's grip on the lawsuit papers tightened, her knuckles turning white. I shouldn't have to see a doctor. The vegetables sold here should be safe for consumption without causing any harm.
It's your responsibility as the market manager to ensure that.
Her voice was sharp, cutting through the hum of the market. Steve sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him.
He knew that resolving this issue would require more than just a simple conversation. Karen, let's try to work this out calmly, he urged, gesturing again for her to move to a quieter area away from the prying eyes of the market patrons. Karen scoffed.
A doctor? What would they know? It's obvious that these vegetables are the problem.
And I won't rest until I get justice. As Karen's voice echoed across the market, drawing the attention of more curious onlookers, I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. Karen was well known at the market for her eccentric behavior, but this was a whole new level of absurdity.
Her insistence that the vegetables were toxic seemed unfounded, and her determination to seek justice was bordering on the extreme.
In the end, Steve managed to calm Karen down, promising to look into her concerns.
Despite his efforts, Karen stormed off, her heels clicking against the cobblestones as she disappeared into the bustling crowd. But as she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last we'd hear of her vegetable vendetta. Her fiery determination hinted that she wouldn't let the matter rest until she felt vindicated, leaving a lingering sense of unease among the vendors. Sure enough, a few weeks later I received a summons in the mail. Karen was taking us to court, and she was determined to prove that our vegetables were the root cause of all her problems.
As I sat in the courtroom listening to Karen's impassioned rant about the dangers of unregulated produce, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of amusement and pity. Here was a woman so convinced of her own righteousness that she was willing to go to absurd lengths to prove her point.
Karen stood at the front of the courtroom, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction as she recounted her supposed suffering. She painted a vivid picture of her allergies, her health struggles, and the relentless pursuit of justice against the perceived negligence of the market. Her arguments were filled with emotion but lacked substance.
As she pointed accusingly at the market vendors, I exchanged knowing glances with my colleagues. It was clear to us that Karen's claims were unfounded, but we couldn't help but marvel at her tenacity.
Throughout the trial, Karen presented various pieces of evidence, from doctor's notes to articles on food safety regulations. However, each time, the judge questioned the relevance of her evidence to the case at hand.
In the end, despite Karen's fervent efforts, the judge ruled in favor of the market, citing a lack of conclusive evidence linking the vegetables to Karen's health issues. As Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her face twisted with anger and defeat, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her misguided crusade. I couldn't help but wonder what would become of her next crusade.
Despite her defeat in court, Karen seemed undeterred in her quest for what she believed to be justice.
Would she continue her vendetta against the market, or would she move on to another cause? One thing was for certain, Karen might have been a bit insane, but she certainly knew how to keep things interesting at the farmer's market.
Her dramatic outbursts and relentless pursuit of what she perceived to be the truth had become a staple of Saturday mornings. Even though her actions sometimes bordered on the absurd, there was a certain excitement that came with never knowing what Karen would do next.
As I packed up my stall and headed home, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of what the next market day would bring.
Love her or hate her, Karen had become an integral part of the market's vibrant community, ensuring that there was never a dull moment in our little corner of the world.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.